The Lord be with you. My microphone's on and I'm ready to go. So good. This story reminds me so much of my third grade class at Washington Elementary School and taking my lunch box every day. I don't know if you all had lunch boxes. Sometimes I'd have a lunch sack and I would just look at all the rich kids who had Johnny Quest lunch pails or G.I. Joe lunch pails with all the action stuff going on, Captain America lunch pails. Anyway, there's something that magical that happened around noon, which was the bell would ring. And now when I look upon the trading that goes on in the New York Stock Exchange, I can relate to that. They have in the New York Stock Exchange, the traders come out in what they call the pit. And if you watch it for a little bit, you can imagine that's exactly what hell must be like. Because they get out there and they just go crazy. They wait for the bell rings, and then immediately people are yelling. And this is kind of what they call the public outcry, is where this is how they communicate to everybody, is they yell at the top of their voice, and they gesticulate wildly about, using all sorts of signs like they were, talking to the pitcher on a baseball field. And they would do their trading until it was stopped. There's massive craziness. That was my third grade class when the bell would ring for lunch. People would run, get their lunch pails, their lunch sacks, and they would go down, and there was usually one person who would say something like, "Let the trade begin." And people would say, "I got a peanut butter sandwich, peanut butter, anybody have bologna. And we begin to trade. The top sandwiches, as you know, are peanut butter and jelly, not marmalade, too chunky, and bologna sandwiches. If you had unfortunately bought a tuna fish sandwich, you were pushed aside. Tuna's over there. You can't be in the pit. If you brought an egg salad sandwich, you go stand with tuna fish. Sometimes I would bring what my mom called an octopus sandwich. And for years, I was convinced that Mom would take an octopus and put it in a blender and then add mayonnaise and then spread it over Wonder Bread. Until then I found out that it wasn't actually an octopus, it was chopped olives. Chopped olives and mayonnaise. Yes. And so in those days, I'd have to stand with tuna and egg salad while the trading would go on. When it would get to desserts, okay, you know what was king in desserts. You had ding-dongs, ho-hos, Twinkies. Can I say amen? Do I hear an amen? Snowballs, and fruit pies, right? And so they go, I got two ding-dongs. Anybody got something I could trade? And then I would say, I got a fruit pie. He said, fruit pie, I'll give you 2 ding-dongs for a fruit pie. What kind of fruit? I'd say, it's chocolate. And I said, okay, that sounds good. Anyway, it would be crazy. And Mrs. Wallstrom, our third grade teacher, would just be sitting there with a smile on her face. Like this was the highlight of her day, was to see this going on. Now, I just say that because that was all based not on human need. We all had sandwiches. That was based upon just sheer greed for peanut butter and jelly and bologna sandwiches. So in this story today, you have this experience of the disciples going across the Sea of Galilee. It takes about 2 hours on a boat to get across the sea. And they're on the other side, and Jesus goes up on the mountain, I don't know, maybe to give them instructions, maybe just to get a little respite, because they had a big encounter back in Jerusalem with the religious leaders that wasn't too wonderful. What they began to realize as they looked over the lake is there was an armada, an invasion of boats that was heading toward them directly. And as they got closer, you can imagine the people in the boat say, there's Jesus. That's the one that we're going to see. And the boats then would land, and you can imagine 5,000 people getting off of 500 boats. 500 boats coming toward you. That's usually something we don't think about. when we think about this story. But it was an armada that took time away to go on a 2-hour cruise to see Jesus. It was right before Passover. And if you have Jewish friends, you know even today how much preparation it takes for the Passover meal. So these Jewish folk left their Passover preparation in order to find Jesus because they had seen him heal. They had seen him make people whole, and they wanted to be with him. One boy got in the boat. Maybe they're going, Johnny, come on, get in the boat, you're going to miss. And his mom runs out and says, hey, Johnny, here, take your lunch. You never know, when you might get hungry. And he gets in that boat, and he crosses the sea with the armada. And he lands there, and he's got his little lunch. And they go up, and as Jesus then sees them, and the disciples are just getting worried, what are we going to do? What is this about? And Jesus says, well, they're going to be hungry. Let's feed them. Jesus' first response was one of hospitality and grace. We're not going to just be up here and teach and do all that. We're going to see to their physical needs. That's a really important lesson for the church, to keep that in the forefront. Because lots of times people will spiritualize this text, say Jesus is the bread of life, and they've come to be full of Jesus. And you know what? We always need to be ministry to the whole person. And the whole person has tummies, and they need food in their bellies. And that's part of extending generosity. So Jesus says, we're going to feed them. And Philip says, it would take a half a year's wage to just give each person a crumb. And that's not going to do it. And then Andrew comes up and says, hey, I found a kid. He's got a lunch. Could that be something? He's got 5 loaves of barley bread and 2 fish. And then it occurs to Andrew how ridiculous that is. And he just it's probably not enough to feed everybody. You got that Eeyore voice going, right? And Jesus is just, you can imagine, he's just smiling because he knows what's going to be happening here. And so out of that little that was brought to him, Jesus began to take, he blessed it, and he began to distribute it out to 5,000 people. And they had their fill of bread and fish. And there was, as the story goes, 12 basketfuls left over out of this little boy's lunch to be able to share. Now, there's something that happened in chapter 47 of the book of Genesis, which bears upon this story. Up until chapter 47, you had the whole Bible up until that point was a liturgy of abundance. From chapter 1, God created the heavens and the earth and filled it. There's this constant filled it with animal life and vegetable life. Then there was a creation of human life. And God said, go and multiply, go and be abundant. Later down, when you get to chapter 12, God chooses and embraces Abraham and says, out of you, I'm going to make so many. Out of you, not only there's going to be children upon children upon children, but through you, all the nations of the world would be blessed. It's just a litany, constant litany of abundance, abundance, abundance. Then chapter 47, zing, it stops. Everything changes in the Bible because Pharaoh has a dream. And Pharaoh has a dream in which for 7 years, as Joseph interprets it, there's going to be a famine. We're not going to have abundance anymore. What do? So they got themselves organized, and they began to realize we have to grow enough corn now to put in storehouses, and then once we have the storehouses, we can control it. Well, the problem being is that once they control all the food supply, then the people of the land came and said they began to trade. Says, I need food. Well, what do you got? I got land. So it was land for food to take care of their people. And then they ran out of land. What do you got? I got cattle. And so it was cattle for the corn. And then what do you got? I don't have anything. All I have is my freedom. And so one by one, the children of Israel began to sell their family into slavery. And that's how that drama began. It began with the myth of scarcity. We don't have enough. And then we have to organize around scarcity. To this day, this seems to be at the heart of our politics. To this day, this is at the heart of our international dealings in the world. Who has enough and who doesn't have enough? And how do those who have enough control the supply? This thinking is embedded in the life of the church, of those who call themselves disciples of Jesus Christ. Those who know better still operate under that idea that there's not enough. Oh, put on the brakes on that idea because we don't have the money. And it's just completely foreign then to everything that Jesus is talking about here. Because in the first inaugural a miracle that Jesus did in John, it was an abundance miracle. It was to reverse all that thinking of myth of scarcity, to go back to the liturgy of abundance. We're running out of what? Wine at a party. And so Jesus goes to where there's 6 jugs of water. I mean, these are huge. Each one can hold about 6 gallons. And so basically Jesus took those jugs and turned water into wine. And not just any wine. This was the best wine around. 180 gallons. An abundance was offered. The first miracle was abundance. This next miracle is also a miracle of abundance. To take that which is minuscule and small and make it magnificent is what then Jesus, when we have our lunch box, when we give it to Jesus with whatever's inside of that lunch box, whatever little thing we might possess, if we give it to Christ, it's magnified. Now, I am a huge fan of Habitat for Humanity. I just signed on to be on their board. I'm so excited to serve in that. I think it's one of the greatest organizations on the planet. And I have here on this little card here what their mission statement and vision statement is, but I'm especially drawn to the number one principle of Habitat for Humanity. I should have just read this to you and then sat down because this is the totality of anything I would need to say. Number one principle, mission principle, to demonstrate the love of Jesus Christ. We undertake our work to demonstrate the love and teachings of Jesus, acting in ways in accord with the belief that God's love and grace abound for all, and that we must be hands and feet of that love and grace in our world. We believe that through faith, the minuscule can be multiplied to accomplish the magnificent. Through faith, the minuscule can be multiplied to accomplish the magnificent. And so they build homes and they repair homes because they want to see every child on the planet having abundance, having provision, being cared for. It's kind of the mission of the church, to be the hands and the feet of the love of God on this planet. Where there is a church in the community should not know hunger. Where there is a disciple of Jesus Christ, there must always be that shift from scarcity to abundant thinking. Throughout my ministry, I have experienced this principle over and over and over again. And I can recount, even last week I talked about Chief John, but I didn't go further in the story of Chief John. Because Chief John, over our years of knowing him, came back into our church over and over again, and he went from an angry look on his face and not wanting to have eye contact to smiling, the most beautiful, radiant smile you'd ever see. And he'd walk through the door, and the children in the church would run to him. "It's Chief John!" And they would crawl all over him, and he would tell them stories. You know, the adults would go and they would seek out some of his wisdom, and they just wanted to hear his stories that he had. One time, a bus of high school students came to help work on our church from the lower 48, as we called it. And as they were getting ready to leave, Chief John runs to the bus, gets on the bus, and he just raises his hands and says, "I would like to give you a blessing." And those kids were so excited that a chief would be there on the bus to give them a blessing. Chief John inhabited that sense of the abundance being flowing out of the human heart. There was in my campus ministry, I was wanting to introduce Taizé worship, which is beautiful music and then silence into the hecticness of the university life. And I couldn't figure out how to do it, and we were praying about it. And then the door opened to our ministry building, and in walks a young woman named Jen. She's a freshman. And she says, "What's this place all about?" That was my introduction. "What's this place all about?" So this is what we do, and we're kind of excited about doing some music ministry. And then her eyes got really big and says, "Well, I would like to be a part of that." So she joined the musicians. Now, Jen plays beautiful flute, and so that was in her lunchbox that she could bring out and offer. It was beautiful. But I could tell you one thing. When Jen would open up her mouth and sing in bell tones, people described it like the floor would disappear underneath them, and that they were in the embrace of God's love, just because she took out of her lunchbox her voice and says, "I am willing to give this to Jesus. It's not much, it's all I got. We'll see what Jesus could do with that." There was another woman in another church, and where I met her was I was preaching, and there were two entrances to the church. It was a small building, and there's two entrances, and she came around the front, and she peeked around the edge. All you could see, you could see kind of like this nervousness and fear, and then she realized she was going into the front of the church where I was preaching, so she ran around and got into the back. And for months, she would just be kind of a hidden presence, but smiling. And that woman, when she was introduced to this idea of community organizing, for a faith-based community organizing, her eyes again popped, "Oh, is there something that I can do for that?" And we got her hired to be an intern in Anchorage to work with community organizing. She fell in love with it. And today, she is a national figure in community organizing in both the Lutheran denomination and the United Methodist denomination. And she came in tentatively, like there wasn't much in her lunchbox. But she had a desire for justice and for the care of people. And God took whatever she had and magnified it and made it magnificent for the world. So the question I have for you is, what is in your lunchbox? The small, the great, that you can turn over to Jesus Christ, because we must begin to believe again in abundance. There is nothing we can't do. No, we don't have near $4 million in our savings, even though we do, close to that. We almost had it down to nothing, and now it's abundant. Are we going to treat it with a myth of scarcity and hold on to it? Are we going to release it for the healing of the world? We have millions upon millions, if you're just talking dollars, because it is in you. It is in your response. We have a calendar full of available times that you have on your calendar. We have skills that are unbelievable just in this very room that God can take and use in mighty ways. So ask yourself the question, what is in your lunchbox that you could hand over to Jesus? Yeah, that little boy was probably going like, that's my lunch. But it all came back to him, didn't it? It all came back to him. So I end with, again, the words in Habitat's mission principle. We believe that through faith, the minuscule can be multiplied to accomplish the magnificent. Amen, amen, and amen.